In the 1950s, in the southern United States, a time marked by racial segregation, the harshness of Jim Crow laws, and a deeply biased justice system, a black woman named Adele Johnson suddenly finds herself plunged into a judicial scandal that shakes the small community. A widow and mother of 2 children, Adele is a gentle and resilient woman, known for her courage and discretion. She works hard to provide her children, Samuel and Grace, with a dignified life despite the obstacles she faces daily. Her husband, Robert Johnson, a respected war veteran loved for his generosity, died a few years earlier in a tragic car accident, leaving Adele alone to raise their children in a modest house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by fields. The loss of Robert could have broken Adele, but she draws strength from her love for her family, her faith, and her inner strength to face the challenges. Each morning, she rises at dawn to work for the white landowners in the area, performing grueling domestic chores to support her children. In the evening, she returns exhausted but determined, preparing meals for Samuel and Grace and ensuring they continue their studies, hoping to offer them a better future. But one day, the unthinkable happens. The county sheriff, a feared figure known for his ruthless authority and openly racist views, is found dead under mysterious circumstances. His death shakes the small town, where his power had loomed for years. The news, spread through gossip and the curiosity of the townspeople, spreads like wildfire, sowing panic and uncertainty. Rumors abound, with everyone speculating about the identity of the culprit, until Adele's name begins to surface in whispered conversations, suspicious glances, and implicit accusations. The sheriff, a man whose authority even local figures of power dared not challenge, had a habit of abusing his power by harassing black families, and Adele's family was his favorite target. His influence over the town extended beyond the law. He instilled terror, manipulating the townspeople into remaining silent or participating in his persecutions under threat of his wrath. Adele and her children were frequent targets of his abuse of power. He would regularly pass by their house under the pretext of necessary surveillance, find excuses to question them, and issue veiled threats, unjustly accusing them of minor, imagined infractions. In his eyes, Adele represented a threat simply because she had the strength not to succumb to the humiliations he inflicted. The townspeople, often silent witnesses to these scenes, recall several public altercations where the sheriff had harassed her for no valid reason. During one such confrontation, he accused her in front of a gathered crowd of disrupting the public order, simply because she calmly defended her children against derogatory remarks. Despite the pain and humiliation, Adele always responded with dignity, refusing to be crushed by the blatant injustice she endured. Her voice, calm and firm, became for some a symbol of courage, a silent resistance in an environment where few dared to confront the sheriff's absolute power. However, the death of this influential and feared man changes the dynamics in this small community. For some, his death is seen as a liberation from the chains of oppression, while for others, it is an unforgivable offense that must be punished. The weight of racial prejudice, already deeply entrenched in the town, immediately turns against Adele. Those who silently hated her for her dignity and resilience see this as an opportunity to crush her once and for all, using this tragedy to accuse her. Soon, the rumor turns into official accusations. Local newspapers headline the brutal murder of a lawman and insinuate, without evidence, Adele's involvement, even though the investigation has just begun. Some neighbors, once compassionate, become wary and distant, fueling suspicions. In their minds, the image of the solitary widow is replaced with that of a dangerous woman, a perception shaped by deeply ingrained stereotypes and fears. For the powerful figures in the county, the sheriff's disappearance also represents a threat to the established order. They are determined to find a scapegoat to appease the masses and reaffirm their control. Adele, a black woman without protection, living on the margins of society, becomes the perfect scapegoat. In a town where the judicial system is controlled by those seeking to maintain their grip on power, her trial takes shape as an example, a way to remind everyone that the white order tolerates no transgression. In the days following the sheriff's death, the small town turns into a hotbed of suspicion and whispers. Eyes turn toward Adele, and conversations in the streets, once quiet, become venomous. In cafes and outside homes, people whisper rumors and suspicions that continue to grow. Some, driven by latent racism, see her as an easy target, an outlet for their own frustrations. Adele, a widow and black mother in a society marked by segregation, is deemed guilty before the trial even begins. The authorities, eager to demonstrate their control and close the case, do not hesitate to charge Adele with alarming speed. To them, gathering solid evidence is unnecessary. Racial hatred and the biased testimony of a few chosen witnesses are enough to give the appearance of legitimacy to the accusation. The few voices that might dare question this mockery of justice fall silent, fearful of the possible repercussions. In this small town, where fairness is a distant concept, the fear of retaliation and the weight of prejudice stifle any attempt at support. During the trial, the courtroom is packed with familiar but hostile faces. No witness speaks in Adele's defense, and those who could speak on her behalf choose to remain silent, fearing they too will be caught in the web of local justice. The evidence presented against her is weak, often anecdotal or manipulated, but this seems enough to fuel the hatred that has settled in the hearts of the townspeople. The heightened racial tensions create a stifling atmosphere, and in this courtroom, the simple fact that Adele is a black woman facing a jury of white people places her in the position of presumed guilty. The prosecutor, a harsh and ruthless man, sees in this case an opportunity to assert his authority and reaffirm the supremacy of a deeply unequal system. With cold rhetoric, he describes Adele as a dangerous and cunning woman, playing on stereotypes and fear, shaping the image of a black widow without scruples. He insists on her presumed deceit, portraying her past altercations with the sheriff as evidence of her rebellious nature and thirst for vengeance. He does not shy away from insinuations, distorting details of her life to use against her. For the prosecutor, this case is much more than a simple trial. It is an opportunity to prove his loyalty to a system he fiercely defends, even at the expense of sacrificing an innocent woman. Despite this avalanche of defamation, Adele remains stoic, displaying a calm that contrasts with the hostile atmosphere. Her gaze remains steady, and her dignified posture exudes quiet strength. Her lawyers, overwhelmed by the scale of the case and the pressure from the authorities, advise her to plead guilty for a lesser sentence. They see this as a slim chance of saving her life in the face of the death penalty. But Adele, true to her values and to the truth, refuses. She knows that by giving in, she would not only surrender her own dignity but also betray the memory of her husband and the future of her children. Her decision to declare her innocence, despite the weight of the accusations, is an act of courage that even shakes her defenders. In this cold, impersonal courtroom, Adele is alone before a dehumanized justice system. She knows that this trial is nothing more than a farce, a display of power disguised as a search for truth. Yet, she holds her head high. Her words, though drowned out by prejudice and the hostile atmosphere, are filled with calm and dignity. Her voice does not tremble as she asserts her innocence, even though she senses that no one is truly listening. Each sentence, each affirmation of her right to live freely, is a silent challenge to a system built to silence her. Around her the gazes are icy, faces closed with hatred or indifference, but Adele does not avert her eyes. In the heavy silence, she feels the contempt of the prosecutor, the indifference of the judge, and the coldness of the jurors, men and women chosen to decide her fate, yet who, in reality, had condemned her long before hearing her defense. The verdict falls like a hammer blow, as relentless as it is predictable. Sentenced to the electric chair, a judgment that resonates in the room as an affirmation of the racial and social order some are determined to preserve at all costs. The moment the verdict is announced is a true punch to Adele's gut. She remains frozen, her heart heavy and her mind in turmoil. The murmurs in the room mingle with the pounding of her heart, each whispered word seeming to wrap around her like a chain. Tears well up in her eyes, but she forces them back with determination, aware that any display of emotion could be seen as a sign of weakness. She refuses to be reduced to the stereotypical image the prosecutor has painted of her, a dangerous woman whose face and story are used to fuel fear and resentment. The courtroom, which should have been a place of justice, becomes a theater of cruelty. The familiar faces of the spectators, those who had seen Adele grow up and should be supporting her, are now marked by anxiety or jubilation. Some, horrified by the turn of events, want to stand up and testify on her behalf, but the weight of social expectations and fear of rejection paralyzes them. Adele perceives their silent struggles and feels their pain, but she also knows that she can rely only on herself. As she is escorted out of the room, each step she takes is heavy with the reality of her situation. The coldness of the hallway and the chains tightening around her wrists symbolize the oppression of a system that seeks to crush her. She hears echoes of her past, the laughter of her children and the sweet memories of her life before this nightmare. But there remains a flame of hope within her. In her heart, she knows that there are still allies, people willing to fight for the truth, even if they seem silenced for now. In the days that follow, Adele locks herself in her thoughts, clinging to the memory of her children and the love that binds them. In the small, cold cell where she waits for her time, the distant sounds of the prison corridors remind her of the imminence of her fate. Yet, despite the anxiety that gnaws at her, she finds within herself the strength to write a letter to her children. The words come to her slowly, each line a struggle where she attempts to condense everything she will never have the chance to say to them. She fights to express her thoughts in a world that seems intent on reducing her existence to oblivion, where her cry of despair is smothered by the walls of her prison. She tells them her version of the story, the absurdity of the accusations against her, and makes them understand that, even in the face of injustice, she never gave in to hatred or fear. Through her words, she hopes to pass on some of her strength and courage, reminding them of the importance of standing tall, even when the world seems determined to crush them. Each word becomes an act of resistance, an attempt to preserve her voice and her legacy, to show them that it is possible to fight for one's dignity, even in the direst of circumstances. Adele also writes words of love and comfort, apologizing for what they will have to endure because of her, even though she knows she is innocent. Tears fill her eyes as she recalls the smiles, the laughter, and the simple moments of happiness they shared. She describes the happy times they had together, from the smell of family meals to the stories told before bedtime, reminding them of the values their father and she tried to instill in them, urging them never to forget their dignity, even in the face of adversity. In a moment of vulnerability, she also mentions her own fear but insists that this fear must never paralyze them. Adele shares with them her dream of seeing them one day overcome obstacles and prejudice, of living in a world that would recognize them for who they are, not for what others assume about them. She hopes they will find the strength to face injustices with the same dignity she tried to show, even in the darkest moments. Her final words carry a hope that feels almost prophetic. She writes, "The truth always comes to light, even if it must pass through the darkest trials. I love you, and even if I am no longer here, my love will be with you every moment. Be strong, my children." It is her way of offering them a final goodbye, a spark of light in a world of darkness. Adele seals this letter with a breath of determination, knowing she is leaving behind a legacy of love and resilience. She folds the paper carefully, her heart heavy with the certainty that she may never see them again. In her cell, she looks around, observing the walls that enclose her, the cold, unwelcoming concrete. Yet, deep inside, she feels a part of her soul rising beyond these physical limits. She dreams of future days when her children, armed with her love, will fight for their own truth. Adele hopes that this letter, even if it never reaches her children, will stand as a testament to her unwavering love and faith in them. She imagines the daylight, the warmth of the sun on their skin, and envisions a future where they can live without fear, without prejudice. As she prepares for what might be her last breath, she promises herself to remain a voice for the oppressed, a light for those struggling in the dark. Silently, she prays that her children will not carry the burden of this infamous condemnation. She wishes for them to remember her as a strong and innocent mother, despite everything. Adele closes her eyes for a moment, imagining herself surrounded by her children, enveloping them with her love. In her mind, she relives the laughter of the past, the stories she used to tell them before they fell asleep, and the evenings spent cooking together, the aromas of their humble meals filling their small home. These memories, fleeting as they are, bring her comfort in the chill of her solitude. She promises herself that she will remain alive in their hearts, like an indomitable flame that will never be extinguished. Despite the darkness that surrounds her, Adele clings to the light of her dreams for them. She hopes that they will find the courage to fight their own battle against the injustices of the world, that when faced with obstacles, they will remember her strength. She wonders if, one day, they will understand the depth of her love, this burning desire to see them flourish in a world where they will not be judged by the color of their skin or by their mother's past. She takes a deep breath, trying to ignore the anxiety lodged in her chest. She focuses on her prayers, mentally reciting the words she learned since childhood. Her faith, though tested, remains an anchor in this storm of uncertainty. She prays not only for her children but also for a better world, where other mothers will not suffer the same fate she has. She dreams of a future where justice will prevail, where truth will be heard, and where love will triumph over prejudice. The clinking of keys in her cell door makes her jump. She knows that every movement, every sound, brings her closer to her fate. But deep inside, a resistance persists. Adele refuses to let this trial break her. In the oppressive silence of her cell, she prepares to face what lies ahead with dignity. Every thought of her children becomes a source of strength, and every memory of love pushes her to stand against injustice, even in the final moments of her life. With renewed resolve, she takes the letter she has written and holds it close to her like a talisman. In these words, she has encapsulated everything she wishes to pass on, everything she would have wanted to say to them face to face. She hopes that, whatever the outcome, her voice will continue to echo through these pages, that her love and hope will soar toward them like a soft whisper. Adele is determined to leave a mark, to prove that, even in pain, a mother's spirit cannot be imprisoned. As the minutes tick by, the atmosphere in the prison grows tense, almost tangible. The hallways echo with the sound of guards' footsteps, but beyond the daily routine, a murmur of concern circulates among them. Some guards, discreet but moved, exchange looks filled with compassion, shocked by the discovery of the anonymous letter that cast doubt on Adele's guilt. This letter, vibrant with emotion, contains testimonies from those who crossed paths with Adele, memories of her kindness and strength. It resonates like a cry of despair in a world where innocence is often trampled. They know this situation goes beyond the usual framework of an ordinary execution. It is a moment of truth, a turning point where the weight of responsibility bears down on their shoulders. Every guard, every prison officer, is aware that their decision could influence the course of this tragic case. They feel the gravity of the situation, but the prison administration and local authorities, concerned with their reputation, still hesitate to act. They fear that canceling Adele's execution would expose the flaws and prejudices in their system, bringing to light the injustices so many others have suffered without a voice. The prison walls, silent witnesses to so much suffering, seem to echo with the cries of the innocent, yet indifference and fear of challenging authority prevail. The palpable tension in the air contrasts with the relative calm of previous days. Preparations for the execution speed up, every detail is checked, and every procedure is followed with mechanical precision. The sound of chains and authoritative voices reverberate through the building, creating an atmosphere of dread and anxiety. Behind the scenes, whispered conversations reveal the internal struggle of the guards, torn between their duty and their conscience. The tension rises as the hours pass, and the faces of the guards, usually indifferent, carry the weight of personal questioning. They wonder how they can be complicit in such a terrible act as doubts creep into even the most hardened minds. One of them, a veteran who has witnessed horrors throughout his career, recalls the faces of the men and women he has escorted, all silenced. Tonight, his heart is not in alignment with his actions. The image of Adele, her determined gaze, continually comes to mind. He recalls a proverb he learned in his youth about the power of a voice that refuses to be silenced, and he begins to understand the depth of Adele's struggle. As the night progresses, the guards exchange stories, rumors, and, in the shadows, a solidarity begins to form. They murmur words of encouragement, some mentioning the need to fight for justice, even in the most unexpected setting. This spark of humanity, though fragile, emerges in a system that seems determined to ignore the cries for help. The preparations continue, but a wind of change begins to blow. Adele's thoughts, trapped in her cell, intertwine with those of the guards, creating an invisible bond between them. The hope for an intervention, for a voice that could change the course of events, starts to grow in the hearts of these men and women within the prison. Every heartbeat resounds like a call for justice, a collective determination not to let injustice prevail without resistance. It is at this critical moment that a young, idealistic lawyer named Ruth Simmons decides to intervene. Ruth, a passionate defender of human rights, had heard about Adele's case and the mysterious letter that surfaced, revealing unspoken truths. Her heart pounds with indignation and determination as she climbs the steps to the state governor's office, her mind boiling with a new energy. Every passing second could be Adele's last, and this only fuels her resolve. Upon entering the governor's office, Ruth faces polite but distant staff, their faces marked by the anxiety of maintaining the facade of a system she believes is collapsing. She demands an emergency hearing, knowing that every minute counts and that an innocent woman's life is at stake. "We cannot let this happen," she declares with conviction, her voice full of a mix of anger and passion. Ruth, full of energy, does not simply wait for a response. She dials the numbers of local newspapers, her heart racing as she explains the situation to every journalist who answers. She contacts other lawyers to assemble a defense team, uniting her efforts with other voices that, like hers, refuse to remain silent. She alerts civil rights activists who share her passion for justice, knowing that every voice matters in the fight for the truth. Within hours, the news explodes in the press, striking and unsettling. An innocent woman is at risk of dying for a crime she didn't commit. The headlines flare up, reporters rushing in to cover the scandal, each of them aware of the importance of their role in exposing this injustice. TV stations organize live reports, while investigative journalists begin digging deeper into the details of Adele's case. The mobilization spreads quickly, transforming into a powerful grassroots movement. Inside the prison, as Adele waits, she has no idea of the events unfolding outside. The minutes feel like hours to her, but she senses a slight change in the air, a new kind of tension, as if the walls of her cell are holding on to hope. The whispers among the guards grow more frequent, and visible signs of solidarity become more apparent. She does not yet know that Ruth's voice is resonating through the halls of justice, carrying her name and her story to those who could make a difference. Every knowing glance exchanged between the guards becomes a small step toward rebellion against injustice. Ruth, in her tireless battle, uses every means at her disposal. She shares troubling statistics on miscarriages of justice and wrongful convictions, highlighting the flaws of a system that has often failed to deliver justice. She records testimonies from people who, like Adele, have been victims of a biased system, shedding light on the absurdity of the prejudices that led to this situation. She passionately argues for Adele's innocence, convinced that public opinion can change the course of events. The pressure builds, and calls to stop the execution multiply. Protests begin to form outside the prison, with signs raised in solidarity with Adele, and cries of support echoing through the streets. Ruth knows that this movement could be the key to saving Adele's life, and she is determined to channel this collective energy into justice. Under growing media pressure and the spontaneous protests forming around the prison, the governor finally relents. Just minutes before the execution, he signs a stay of execution, temporarily halting the sentence. The phone rings in the execution chamber, and the guards, relieved but shocked, guide Adele out of the death chamber. Adele, exhausted but free for now, is placed in solitary confinement while the truth is examined more deeply. The atmosphere in the prison is charged with a mix of hope and anxiety. While the threat of execution has been pushed aside for the moment, the specter of injustice continues to haunt the cold walls of her cell. Lawyer Ruth Simmons, determined and unwavering, becomes her steadfast support. She vows to do everything in her power to prove Adele's innocence, knowing that the road ahead will be full of obstacles. With the help of activist lawyers, Ruth conducts a parallel investigation, combing through every detail of the case. The first few hours pass slowly, but each minute is precious. Together, they question witnesses, explore documents, and uncover evidence that had been ignored. Gradually, other secrets are revealed. The murdered sheriff, once respected, owned inexplicable wealth and property for someone in his position. This revelation raises troubling questions about his true activities and the integrity of those around him. Digging deeper, Ruth discovers that the sheriff had made enemies within his own circle, people frustrated by his corrupt methods and arrogant behavior. Testimonies begin to pour in, painting a picture of a complex man, struggling with internal conflicts and rivalries. As the pieces of the puzzle begin to come together, Ruth starts to suspect that a much larger conspiracy lies behind the sheriff's death and Adele's accusation. One evening, as she sifts through the investigation files, Ruth comes across a document that catches her attention. A series of secret communications between the sheriff and a certain individual, someone who always seemed to be present in his circle. Intrigued, she delves into the history of this person, discovering that they had everything to gain from the sheriff's death. The evidence piles up, and the guilt of this individual becomes increasingly evident. Ruth eventually uncovers that this same person, consumed by guilt, had written the anonymous letter that saved Adele from execution. In this letter, they indirectly confessed their own crimes, unable to bear the weight of their secret any longer. This unfortunate confession becomes the key that could finally allow Adele to prove her innocence. In the isolation of her cell, Adele does not yet know that the truth is slowly emerging. She receives news through Ruth, who passes along messages of encouragement and determination. Although the fear of injustice continues to haunt her, she draws strength from Ruth and her team's unwavering commitment. A few weeks later, the court overturns Adele's conviction, and the verdict rings out like a long-awaited melody of freedom. She is released to the cheers of those who fought for her freedom, a flood of familiar and unfamiliar faces, all united in the joy of this historic moment. Shouts of joy, tears of happiness, and slogans of solidarity fill the air as Adele steps out of the cold walls of the prison, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Yet, as the crowd celebrates her release, Adele feels a mixture of emotions. Freedom, though precious, is bittersweet. She wonders how to reclaim a normal life after being so close to death, after having been stripped of her identity, dignity, and future. The scars of the injustice she suffered are still fresh, marking her mind and heart. She feels like a stranger in her own world, a world that continued to spin while she was locked in a cell, lost in the indifference of the system. Nevertheless, the voice of hope whispers within her. Adele takes a deep breath and decides not to remain silent. Supported by Ruth and by many organizations that have surrounded her with unwavering solidarity, she embarks on a new fight. Adele becomes an emblematic figure in the struggle against racial injustice, transforming from a victim into a fighter. She travels to cities, driven by the desire to share her story and give a voice to those whom the system silences. In every city she visits, Adele speaks with passion and determination. She tells her story, the abuses she suffered, but also the hope she has for a better future. Her voice resonates as a call to action, urging others to rise up against the injustices they face. She realizes that by sharing her story, she is creating momentum, a movement that transcends borders and unites struggles. Her words touch hearts, awaken consciences, and encourage others to claim their rights and defend their dignity. Her children, whom she finally reunites with, look at her with admiration. They see their mother not only as a survivor but as a heroine who defies the status quo. Through her, they discover the power of dignity and resilience. Adele becomes a role model for them, a source of inspiration that teaches them the value of fighting for what is right. She instills in them the importance of social justice, empathy, and courage. Together, they participate in community events, sharing moments of joy and solidarity. Adele introduces her children to the power of community, the importance of unity in the fight against oppression. They attend protests, meet civil rights leaders, and learn to use their voices to make their concerns heard. Years later, the case of Adele Johnson will inspire the creation of new laws designed to protect the innocent from the death penalty, shining a light on the flaws of a judicial system that is often faulty. Her story will forever mark the memory of those who witnessed her relentless fight for justice, becoming a powerful symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. The impact of her case will be felt in the corridors of power. Legislators, influenced by public mobilization and the tireless efforts of Adele and her allies, will begin to propose reforms that will strengthen protections for the rights of the accused. Initiatives will be launched to closely examine wrongful convictions, and commissions will be set up to study judicial errors. The voices of civil rights activists, committed lawyers, and supportive citizens will join Adele's in demanding deep changes. In schools and universities, Adele's journey will become a subject of study, used to raise awareness among young generations about the reality of racial injustice and the importance of defending the rights of the oppressed. Documentaries and books will be published, telling her story and that of the many people affected by the death penalty. The media, which once covered her ordeal, will become allies in spreading her message, educating the public about the systemic issues that persist in society. Through conferences, workshops, and awareness campaigns, Adele will continue to be involved in social causes, using her platform to encourage others to engage in the fight against injustices. Her voice, filled with wisdom and experience, will resonate at civil rights rallies, where she will share her message of hope and resilience. Her fight, far from over, will extend to touch other social issues, such as criminal justice reform, poverty, and the promotion of education. In the years following her release, Adele will be regularly invited to speak at national forums, and her story will often be cited as an example of the human ability to overcome adversity. New laws emerging from her case will include provisions to ban the death penalty in cases where there is insufficient evidence or racial bias involved. The establishment of mechanisms to review convictions and stricter protocols to ensure fair trials will become priorities. Ultimately, Adele Johnson's struggle will not only lead to legal reforms but also to a cultural shift. Society will begin to recognize the importance of empathy and understanding in handling judicial matters. Discussions on justice and equality will become more frequent, and the voices of those who have long been silenced will begin to rise. Adele's legacy will be passed down through generations, her name becoming synonymous with the fight for justice. Scholarships will be established in her honor to help young lawyers and human rights defenders pursue their education and commitment. Statues and memorials will be erected in public spaces, reminding everyone that the fight for justice is a collective one, and that each person can play a role in creating a more equitable world. Thus, the story of Adele Johnson, born from an abominable injustice, will transform into a powerful movement for human rights, uniting people from all walks of life in the quest for a society where justice and equality are no longer empty words but lived realities for all.